The clock ticked past midnight when the first call came in. The voice on the line was trembling, almost incoherent. You need to come. It's my parents. Something terrible happened. Those 6 words would ignite a chain of events that no one could have imagined. In the quiet, tree-lined streets of Crestwood Hills, a tragedy was unfolding. One that would shake a family to its core and leave an entire community asking the same question. How could this happen right under their noses? But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Most people think they know their family. They think they see the patterns, the habits, the tiny signals that indicate who can be trusted and who can't. But the truth is far more sinister. What if the person you love the most, the person you thought you knew, was capable of something unimaginable? Tonight, you're about to find out how one family's dark secrets came to light, and why the world could only watch in horror as a seemingly perfect life unraveled in ways that no one saw coming. It began with an estate, a sprawling mansion nestled among the hills, with manicured gardens, a glittering pool, and walls lined with memories. To an outsider, the Holloways seemed like a picture-perfect family. Richard Holloway, 78, was a retired philanthropist, a man who had built an empire and a legacy. His wife, Marjorie, 70, was the calm anchor, the one who hosted lavish garden parties and kept the household running with quiet efficiency. And their son, Nathan, 32, lived in the guest house on the property. To anyone glancing from the outside, nothing seemed amiss. But appearances are deceiving. They always are. The night of the tragedy started like any other. The family was scattered across the estate, each engaged in their own evening routines. Dinner plates had been cleared, the soft hum of classical music floated through the halls, and the lights dimmed in preparation for the night. Yet behind closed doors, tension had been mounting for months. Quiet arguments, subtle threats, whispered suspicions. These were the cracks in a foundation that no one wanted to acknowledge. Romy Holloway, 27, the youngest daughter, had always been perceptive, the type of person who noticed what others overlooked. That night, she went to check on her parents, only to find the unthinkable. Her scream echoed through the mansion, a chilling alarm that shattered the veneer of normalcy. It was in that moment, standing in the grand hallway, that she realized the horror she had feared might be true. Her parents were dead, and this was no accident. Multiple sharp force injuries had been inflicted, evidence of a brutal, premeditated act. The medical examiner would later classify it as homicide. But the question that haunted Romy, and would haunt everyone who heard her story, was, who could have done this? The authorities arrived quickly. The police were methodical, professional, but even they were shocked by the scene. There was no forced entry, no signs of robbery. Everything pointed to someone who had been inside the house before, someone who knew the routines, the schedules, the hidden corners. Suspicion began to swirl, like smoke, filling every room and every mind. Nathan, the son who had lived in the guest house, was immediately on the radar. Witnesses recalled heated arguments earlier in the week, strange behavior, an air of hostility that hadn't been there before. Friends and family began to whisper, connecting dots that no one wanted to connect out loud. Could it really be him? The son? The boy they had raised, nurtured, and loved? The question itself was unbearable, yet impossible to ignore. But the story didn't end there. In the days that followed, rumors and leaks began to surface. A mysterious note found in a private drawer, a burner phone with messages that hinted at secrets, and whispers of hidden tensions that had been festering for years. The family's pristine image began to crumble, revealing layers of deception, betrayal, and darkness that no one could have imagined. What made this story even more chilling was how close to home it felt. The Holloways were wealthy, well-connected, and seemingly untouchable. And yet, in the shadows of their sprawling estate, the worst nightmare came to life. It was a stark reminder that no amount of money, privilege, or social status can shield a family from tragedy when secrets go unchecked. As investigators dug deeper, a disturbing picture emerged. There were hints of long-buried disputes, financial tensions, and relationships strained beyond repair. Friends and neighbors began to recount incidents that, in retrospect, seemed like warning signs, sudden outbursts, unexplained absences, cryptic comments. The narrative was slowly coming together, piece by piece, but every new revelation only raised more questions. Who could be trusted? Who was hiding something? And most importantly, what had really happened that night in the Holloway estate? To understand the magnitude of this tragedy, you must step inside the house, walk the halls, and hear the stories that unfolded behind the walls. Every family has its secrets, but some secrets are deadly. Some secrets have the power to destroy lives, tear apart the bonds of love, and leave scars that never heal. Tonight, we are going to explore every angle, uncover every hidden truth, and reveal what the world didn't see coming. But before we dive into the heart of the story, consider this. How well do you really know your family? The answer might surprise you. Because the closer the ties, the sharper the betrayal. And in the Holloway case, betrayal wasn't just a possibility. It was the centerpiece of a chilling, unforgettable tragedy. In the coming chapters, you'll hear the accounts of friends, investigators, and insiders. You'll learn about the strange behavior leading up to that night, the critical mistakes, and the shocking twists that left everyone reeling. You'll encounter betrayal, greed, and heartbreak in a way that feels almost cinematic, but it's real. Every detail matters. Every revelation changes the story, and every chapter ends with a new question, a new cliffhanger, a reason to keep watching. So buckle up. The story you are about to hear is not for the faint of heart. It is a story of a family torn apart, a night that changed everything, and secrets that refused to stay buried. By the end, you'll be left questioning not only what happened in Crestwood Hills, but whether any family can truly be safe from the darkness that sometimes hides in plain sight. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The night started like any other, but by the time the first emergency responders arrived, nothing would ever be the same. The Holloway estate, perched high on Crestwood Hills, gleamed under the moonlight, its grandeur untouched by the horror that had just unfolded inside. To the casual observer, it was a picture-perfect scene of wealth, calm, and security. But inside, chaos reigned. Romy Holloway, 27, had discovered the unthinkable. Her parents, Richard and Marjorie Holloway, lay motionless in the grand hallway. Their lives ended in a manner that was almost too brutal to comprehend. She could barely process what she was seeing: the blood, the stillness, the silence. Her hands shook violently as she reached for her phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. Each second felt like an eternity, the gravity of what she was witnessing pressing down like a physical weight. When the first police officers arrived, they were met with a scene that would haunt them for the rest of their careers. No signs of forced entry, no apparent motive. And yet, the evidence was undeniable. Multiple sharp force injuries had taken the lives of two people who had once epitomized family stability. As the investigators examined the scene, they realized something chilling. This was not a random act of violence. The perpetrator had intimate knowledge of the house, the schedules, and the routines. Whoever had done this had been inside the walls before. Nathan Holloway, the 32-year-old son, became the immediate focus of the investigation. Living in the guest house on the property, he had proximity and access. Friends and neighbors recalled subtle signs in the days leading up to the tragedy: uncharacteristic anger, fleeting moments of hostility, odd behavior that, in retrospect, seemed like a warning. But the thought that a child could harm their own parents? That was a line no one wanted to cross in their minds. The investigation moved quickly, but the questions only multiplied. Romy's account of the night became crucial. She had noticed minor details that, at first, seemed inconsequential: a window slightly ajar, a misplaced object, an unusual scent in the air. In isolation, each was nothing. Together, they formed a puzzle no one could yet solve. Neighbors described hearing strange noises in the days leading up to the incident: shouting, doors slamming, a sense of tension that had begun to permeate the once serene neighborhood. Some dismissed it as family disagreements, typical of any household. Others, however, sensed a darkness lurking beneath the surface, an unspoken conflict that threatened to explode. Investigators began to dig into the family's history, uncovering subtle fissures in what appeared to be a flawless life. Financial disputes, long-standing grudges, and hidden resentments came to light, painting a picture that was far more complex than anyone had imagined. Interviews with extended family members revealed past incidents, arguments that escalated, secrets kept from each other, small betrayals that slowly festered into something larger. The press quickly picked up the story, sensationalizing the tragedy in ways that made the public both horrified and obsessed. Headlines screamed of betrayal and horror, while social media became a battleground of speculation and rumor. Each day brought new details, some accurate, others exaggerated or entirely false, but all adding to the growing tension around the case. In the midst of this chaos, a series of discoveries complicated the investigation further. Hidden notes, a mysterious burner phone, and cryptic messages suggested that the family may have been harboring secrets even darker than anyone imagined. Questions arose about Nathan's relationships, his mental state, and whether he was acting alone or being influenced by someone else entirely. Every lead seemed to open another door, another corridor of uncertainty, and the investigators had to navigate the labyrinth carefully. Romy Holloway's role became even more pivotal as details emerged. She was the first to see the aftermath, the first to recognize that the home she had grown up in would never be the same. Her testimony would be scrutinized, dissected, and challenged as authorities attempted to piece together the events leading to that fateful night. Friends described her as intelligent, perceptive, and emotionally resilient, qualities that would prove essential as the investigation progressed. Yet, even as the detectives gathered evidence, the community struggled to come to terms with the tragedy. How could a family, seemingly perfect on the surface, be capable of harboring such darkness? How could love, trust, and familiarity coexist with betrayal and violence? These questions lingered, unanswered, feeding the obsession that would drive both investigators and the public to seek explanations. As the night of the discovery receded into memory, patterns began to emerge. Small inconsistencies in stories, tiny anomalies in schedules, and subtle indications of hidden conflicts coalesced into a narrative that was as shocking as it was heartbreaking. It became clear that this was not merely a crime of opportunity, but a carefully orchestrated act, one that required planning, knowledge, and intent. The deeper the investigators delved, the more complex the story became. The Holloway estate, once a symbol of stability and affluence, now stood as a monument to the fragility of trust, the danger of secrecy, and the unpredictable nature of human behavior. Every revelation brought new questions, and every answer seemed to lead to more mysteries. And then, just when it seemed that the investigation had reached a plateau, a new discovery shook everyone to the core. Evidence suggested that the events of that night were only the tip of the iceberg. There were hints of motives hidden in plain sight, relationships strained beyond repair, and actions that defied logic and reason. The complexity of the case grew exponentially, leaving everyone, investigators, family, and community alike, on edge, wondering what the next revelation would bring. The chapter closes with a question that hangs in the air, unanswered and haunting. How far had Nathan Holloway gone, and what drove him to commit an act that no one could have imagined? The answers would not come easily, and the path forward was riddled with surprises, betrayals, and truths that would shock even the most seasoned investigators. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The morning after the tragedy, Crestwood Hills was eerily quiet. The sun rose over the mansion, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured gardens, but inside, the Holloway estate remained a crime scene frozen in time. Police tapes stretched across the driveway, reporters' vans lined the street, and neighbors whispered behind closed doors, struggling to reconcile the image of the family they thought they knew with the horror that had occurred. Detectives returned to the scene, determined to peel back each layer of the mystery. They examined every corner, every room, every crevice of the estate. Nothing escaped their scrutiny, not the slightly ajar window that Romy had noticed, nor the subtle smudge on a polished table. To the trained eye, every detail told a story. To everyone else, it was an incomprehensible mess. The focus remained squarely on Nathan Holloway. While no formal charges had yet been filed, investigators found it difficult to ignore the mounting circumstantial evidence. Witnesses described heated arguments between Nathan and his parents in the days before the murders. Friends and acquaintances mentioned subtle behavioral changes. Nights spent alone, unusual phone calls, periods of withdrawal, and cryptic social media posts that hinted at inner turmoil. Each piece of evidence seemed innocuous on its own but, when combined, painted a picture that was increasingly difficult to dismiss. Romy Holloway, meanwhile, became the reluctant focal point of the investigation. Her discovery of her parents' bodies meant she was now a key witness, tasked with recounting every detail she remembered. But trauma, as investigators quickly realized, complicates memory. What she had seen that night was forever etched into her mind. Yet the fear and shock of the moment made certain recollections fragmented, unclear, or contradictory. Detectives had to tread carefully, piecing together her testimony while respecting the emotional weight of what she had endured. While the investigation progressed, new information began to emerge about the Holloway family's private life. Long-term friends revealed that tensions had been simmering for years, disagreements over inheritance, the division of family assets, and the handling of the estate. Subtle conflicts had escalated into arguments, sometimes witnessed by neighbors, sometimes whispered in private. Financial records indicated transfers and withdrawals that seemed suspicious, raising the possibility that monetary disputes may have contributed to the breakdown in family relationships. In parallel, law enforcement discovered anomalies that deepened the mystery. A hidden drawer in Nathan's guest house contained a series of handwritten notes, some addressed to family members, others cryptic and fragmented. They spoke of resentment, fear, and perceived slights, hinting at a mindset that had become increasingly unstable. Investigators began to ask themselves a chilling question. Were these writings merely venting frustration, or were they precursors to something far more sinister? As the days passed, rumors spread like wildfire. Social media became a breeding ground for speculation, with online users dissecting every publicly available detail. Photos from previous family gatherings were scrutinized for clues, expressions, body language, even seating arrangements. Every minor inconsistency was dissected, debated, and broadcast to a growing audience eager for answers. The line between fact and conjecture blurred, adding pressure not only on investigators, but also on the surviving Holloway family members. During this period, investigators uncovered another significant lead: Nathan's communications. Text messages, emails, and call logs revealed interactions with friends, acquaintances, and distant relatives. While none explicitly admitted to the crime, patterns emerged. Certain phrases, repeated behaviors, and timing of communications suggested premeditation. The detective's challenge became one of interpretation. Understanding which behaviors were relevant, which were circumstantial, and which were red herrings deliberately planted to mislead. Romy's emotional journey during this time added another layer of complexity. She was grappling with grief, shock, and a profound sense of betrayal. Interviews with psychologists revealed that trauma of this magnitude can distort perception, influence memory, and even alter emotional responses to events. For Romy, every conversation, every glance, and every interaction carried the weight of both loss and suspicion. Her internal struggle mirrored the broader uncertainty surrounding the investigation. How do you reconcile love for someone with the suspicion that they could be capable of unimaginable violence? As the investigation continued, the Holloway estate itself became a character in the unfolding drama. Each room, hallway, and hidden corner seemed to hold secrets waiting to be uncovered. Investigators began cataloging items that had once seemed mundane but now carried potential significance. A misplaced book, a smudged fingerprint on a light switch, a drawer left slightly open. These small details began to reveal patterns, suggesting that the night of the murders was not a chaotic outburst but a carefully orchestrated act. Yet, despite mounting evidence, no definitive conclusion had been reached. Nathan remained in custody, questioned extensively, but never fully admitting to or denying the allegations. The detectives' reliance on circumstantial evidence meant that the case hinged on interpretation, timing, and the ability to connect seemingly disparate events into a coherent narrative. Each day brought new revelations, but each revelation also raised new questions, deepening the mystery rather than resolving it. Meanwhile, The Holloway family's extended network began to fracture under the pressure. Friends took sides, distant relatives weighed in with theories, and whispers of hidden alliances and betrayals proliferated. The public, consumed by curiosity and the desire for closure, became an audience to a story that had grown far beyond the confines of the estate. Every new headline, every new leak, served to heighten tension, making resolution increasingly elusive. But Nathan's psychological profile was only one aspect of the investigation. As law enforcement delved deeper, they uncovered troubling dynamics among other family members, particularly the extended Holloway network. Financial disputes had long simmered under the surface. Richard Holloway, the family patriarch, had left detailed instructions for asset distribution, but disagreements over interpretation created fissures. Some documents suggested that Nathan had been denied certain privileges or sums he expected, fueling resentment and heightening tension. Others hinted at manipulations, subtle coercions, and indirect threats, actions designed to pressure, provoke, or destabilize him emotionally. At the same time, neighbors began coming forward with additional insights. One longtime resident recalled seeing Nathan outside the estate late at night, pacing and speaking on the phone in an unusually agitated state. Another mentioned overhearing arguments between Nathan and his parents about property rights, inheritance, and trust funds. Each account, while anecdotal, began to form a consistent pattern. Nathan's relationship with his family had deteriorated over time, punctuated by moments of intense conflict and emotional volatility. The Holloway mansion itself also revealed its secrets. Hidden compartments, locked drawers, and concealed storage spaces were discovered in rooms previously thought to be ordinary. Some contained letters and journals, documenting private grievances and observations about family dynamics. Others contained mundane items, yet their placement suggested intentional concealment. Every discovery seemed to confirm one grim reality. The estate was a repository of secrets, tensions, and simmering resentments, each waiting for the right, or wrong, moment to erupt. During this period, law enforcement also examined Nathan's online footprint. Social media posts, encrypted messages, and deleted accounts hinted at broader connections. There were forums, groups, and discussions focused on family disputes, mental health struggles, and unconventional advice for resolving conflicts. Investigators began piecing together a narrative. Nathan was not merely reacting impulsively, but rather navigating a labyrinth of personal pressures, emotional instability, and external influences that together may have set the stage for tragedy. For Romy, the emotional toll intensified. The weight of grief, compounded by the growing public scrutiny, left her oscillating between disbelief, anger, and despair. Psychologists working with her noted that she was experiencing classic signs of trauma: hypervigilance, intrusive thoughts, and episodes of dissociation. Yet she also displayed remarkable clarity when recounting specific details of that night, underscoring the duality of trauma. The mind can both distort and preserve memory with unnerving precision. Her observations became central to understanding not only the timeline of events, but also the psychological landscape in which the crime occurred. As the investigation progressed, the authorities discovered additional evidence pointing to calculated behavior. Security footage, previously overlooked, revealed Nathan moving in ways that suggested familiarity and intent. He knew the blind spots in cameras, the timing of patrols, and the daily routines of the household staff. Small yet critical actions, locking doors behind him, repositioning items, and subtly manipulating lights, indicated planning that extended beyond a momentary lapse of judgment. Every clue added to the narrative of a methodical, deliberate act, challenging early assumptions that this was a spontaneous crime of passion. Financial records further complicated the story. Transfers, withdrawals, and unexplained transactions raised questions about motive. Was Nathan acting purely out of resentment? Or were there tangible incentives driving his behavior, such as monetary gain, inheritance disputes, or the control of assets? The combination of psychological instability and material incentives painted a complex portrait, one that law enforcement would struggle to untangle for months. By the end of Chapter 3, the investigation had expanded into multiple directions. Nathan remained the central figure, yet evidence suggested that the Holloway tragedy was not the product of a single factor, but rather a convergence of personal, psychological, and material pressures. Every interview, every lead, every document hinted at a deeper story, one that was still partially hidden beneath layers of deception, secrecy, and carefully constructed appearances. And just as investigators began to believe they were approaching clarity, a new and unexpected piece of evidence surfaced, one that threatened to rewrite everything they thought they knew about the night of the murders. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The Holloway tragedy had already captured headlines nationwide, but the deeper investigators dug, the more complex the case became. By now, Nathan Holloway was the primary person of interest, but the evidence suggested layers of hidden motives, long-standing grudges, and psychological strain that no single explanation could fully encompass. It was early morning when the forensic team returned to the estate. The light filtered through the tall windows, casting elongated shadows across the marble floors, yet the scene was far from serene. Every corner of the mansion seemed to conceal a story waiting to be uncovered. The team methodically examined the guest house, focusing on areas Nathan frequented most. They noticed subtle signs of intentional placement. Books shifted slightly, objects moved just enough to obscure their true positions. These details indicated that whoever was responsible had a deep familiarity with the home's layout, the habits of its occupants, and the timing of daily routines. Investigators also began examining Nathan's social interactions more closely. They discovered that he had been communicating with multiple individuals in the weeks leading up to the incident, though the exact nature of these interactions remained murky. Some messages were cryptic, hinting at financial disputes, perceived slights, or familial tension. Others contained an emotional undertone, frustration, desperation, and at times, anger. The mix of calculated planning and emotional volatility painted a troubling picture. Nathan's behavior appeared influenced by both internal conflicts and external pressures, though the specifics were still unclear. The family's financial records added another dimension to the investigation. There were inconsistencies in asset transfers, unusual withdrawals, and notes that suggested certain expectations were unmet. Richard Holloway had always been meticulous in documenting the estate's finances, but these discrepancies hinted at disputes or misunderstandings that had festered over time. Investigators questioned whether these tensions alone could have contributed to the events of that night, or whether they were merely one piece of a larger puzzle involving psychological strain, resentment, and potential manipulation. Romy's role continued to be critical. She recounted the night of the murders in painstaking detail, emphasizing minor occurrences that at first seemed trivial: a chair slightly out of place, a door left ajar, the absence of a personal item that should have been in its usual spot. While initially overlooked, these details provided valuable context for reconstructing the timeline. Investigators began to see patterns emerge, understanding not only where Nathan had been that night, but also the sequence of actions that led to the tragedy. Meanwhile, neighbors and acquaintances contributed pieces to the puzzle. One reported seeing Nathan near the property boundary, pacing and appearing anxious, a detail consistent with later evidence indicating premeditation. Another recalled hearing raised voices the week prior, with Nathan arguing over control of certain areas within the estate. These seemingly mundane observations suddenly took on greater significance, illustrating a narrative of mounting tension and conflict. As forensic teams examined the estate further, they uncovered hidden notes and journals that provided additional insight into the family dynamic. Some of these writings indicated long-standing grievances between Nathan and his parents, while others hinted at unresolved conflicts with extended family members. The content suggested that Nathan had been internalizing frustration over months, perhaps even years, creating an emotional pressure cooker that contributed to the events of that night. Investigators also analyzed Nathan's digital footprint. Emails, encrypted messages, and deleted accounts revealed communications with friends and acquaintances that raised suspicions. Patterns suggested that Nathan may have been influenced, intentionally or not, by advice or perspectives from outside the immediate family. Whether this influence was benign or malignant remained unclear, but it added another layer to understanding the psychological and situational pressures that shaped his actions. The psychological component of the investigation became increasingly central. Experts noted classic signs of stress, anxiety, and resentment, combined with impulsive tendencies and a perceived sense of injustice. Nathan's behavior, both before and after the tragedy, reflected a complex interplay between emotional instability and calculated decision-making. This duality made the case particularly challenging. Distinguishing between deliberate planning and impulsive reaction required careful analysis and nuanced interpretation. Evidence from the guest house and mansion suggested that the events of the night were meticulously staged. Certain items had been deliberately positioned to obscure timelines, mislead observers, or conceal the true sequence of actions. These discoveries reinforced the conclusion that the tragedy was not merely a spontaneous outburst, but involved deliberate preparation and strategic intent. As Chapter 4 closed, investigators faced an increasingly complicated narrative. Nathan remained at the center, yet his motivations, influences, and potential accomplices were still not fully understood. The tragedy that had begun as a shocking event in Crestwood Hills was evolving into a complex study of human behavior, familial dynamics, and psychological tension. And just when authorities believed they were beginning to understand the sequence of events, a new revelation emerged, one that would shatter previous assumptions and alter the trajectory of the investigation entirely. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. By the fifth day of the investigation, the Holloway case had escalated beyond the confines of the estate. News outlets were reporting minute-by-minute updates, neighbors were buzzing with speculation, and the public had become almost as invested in the story as the investigators themselves. Yet behind the headlines, the detectives were grappling with a growing web of evidence that was more intricate and more disturbing than anyone had anticipated. It began with Nathan's sudden admission of past conflicts. During a lengthy interview with law enforcement, he recounted arguments with his parents that seemed at first minor but, upon closer examination, suggested deeper emotional fractures. Disputes over inheritance, the management of family assets, and the delegation of responsibilities had created tension that simmered below the surface for months. While Nathan's accounts were sometimes contradictory, certain recurring details aligned with physical evidence found at the estate. Each fragment of memory, each subtle description, allowed investigators to reconstruct portions of the night leading up to the tragedy with increasing clarity. In parallel, the forensic team continued to uncover critical details within the mansion. A series of letters, hidden in a false compartment in the library, revealed not only long-standing resentments, but also a pattern of communication that suggested someone had been monitoring family interactions closely. These letters, some written by Nathan and some by other family members, described grievances over perceived slights, financial disputes, and issues of trust. The cumulative weight of these writings illustrated a complex network of relationships, fraught with tension and emotional volatility, that investigators now recognized as pivotal in understanding the sequence of events. One particularly disturbing discovery involved a series of encrypted messages on a secondary device. While Nathan had claimed that he had no knowledge of certain communications, forensic experts determined that these messages were integral to understanding the broader context of familial disputes. The content suggested not only personal grievances, but also an awareness of the potential consequences of escalating conflicts. Investigators began to consider that Nathan's actions may have been influenced by both immediate emotional responses and calculated premeditation, a combination that made the case exceptionally challenging to analyze. Meanwhile, Romy Holloway struggled to process the flood of information coming to light. Every new detail seemed to reopen the wound of loss, forcing her to confront the reality of her parents' deaths in ways she had not anticipated. Psychologists working with her noted that this phase of the investigation was critical. Processing trauma while providing accurate testimony required extraordinary mental resilience. Romy's observations, her memory of specific moments, gestures, and sequences became invaluable in corroborating physical evidence and reconstructing timelines. Her role was central, not just emotionally but also factually, in shaping the direction of the investigation. As the team pieced together the events, patterns began to emerge. Security footage, previously examined superficially, revealed subtle movements that suggested strategic planning. Nathan appeared to navigate blind spots, manipulate lighting, and avoid areas under surveillance. Every action seemed deliberate, indicating not impulsive behavior, but a degree of forethought that added another layer of complexity. Investigators were forced to reevaluate earlier assumptions, considering that what had initially appeared as erratic behavior might in fact have been part of a larger, orchestrated plan. In addition to physical and psychological evidence, investigators explored Nathan's social environment. Friends, colleagues, and acquaintances provided insights into his behavior, moods, and interpersonal dynamics. Several reported noticing abrupt changes in demeanor, unusual absences, and private conversations that hinted at hidden struggles. While none of these observations directly implicated him in the crime, they contributed to a growing portrait of a man under significant stress, navigating both internal conflict and external pressures. Financial analysis continued to yield important information. Transactions, withdrawals, and unaccounted-for transfers suggested unresolved disputes within the family structure. Questions arose about Nathan's motivations. Were these purely emotional, or did material gain play a role in the sequence of events? The interplay of money, resentment, and familial obligation complicated the narrative, underscoring that this was not a simple act of anger, but a multifaceted situation shaped by years of hidden tension. Investigators also examined the broader psychological landscape of the Holloway family. Historical accounts indicated recurring patterns of miscommunication, perceived favoritism, and unresolved grievances that extended beyond Nathan. While he remained central to the investigation, it became clear that understanding the family dynamics as a whole was critical to interpreting behavior, motive, and opportunity. Each family member's role, whether active or passive, influenced the unfolding tragedy in ways that were subtle but significant. By the end of Chapter 5, the case had expanded into an intricate narrative of preparation, emotional volatility, and family complexity. Nathan Holloway remained the focal point, but the investigation revealed that the events of that night were influenced by far more than a single decision or emotional outburst. They were the result of a convergence of psychological, social, and material pressures, an explosive combination that no one outside the family could have anticipated. And just when investigators thought they were beginning to understand the scope of the tragedy, a new and startling piece of evidence emerged, one that would upend prior assumptions and change the course of the investigation forever. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. By the sixth day, the Holloway investigation had evolved into a sprawling, almost labyrinthine inquiry, one that spanned psychological analysis, forensic evidence, digital footprints, and the fragile nuances of family dynamics. What had begun as a shocking crime scene was now a complex puzzle, with each new piece revealing hidden layers of tension, secrecy, and motive. It started with a discovery in the mansion's study, a room that until now had been considered largely mundane. Forensic teams found a set of journals hidden behind a false panel in a bookcase. The journals were written in meticulous detail, documenting family interactions, financial disputes, and private frustrations. Some entries were terse and factual, while others were emotional, raw, and at times unhinged. They detailed arguments over inheritance, perceived betrayals, and incidents that at first seemed trivial but, collectively, revealed a pattern of escalating tension over years. Investigators realized these journals were more than just personal reflections. They were a roadmap of resentment, strategy, and unresolved emotional conflict. Nathan Holloway's role in the unfolding events became increasingly complex. While some of the journal entries suggested he had been struggling with anger and frustration, others hinted at careful observation, calculation, and the deliberate manipulation of circumstances. It became clear to investigators that understanding Nathan required not only an examination of his actions, but also an exploration of his mental and emotional state over the preceding months. His behavior was a combination of impulsive emotional reactions and calculated maneuvers, a duality that made the case exceptionally challenging to analyze. Romy Holloway, already a key witness, began recounting details from her own perspective that provided context for the journals and other evidence. She described subtle changes in Nathan's demeanor leading up to the night of the tragedy, moments of withdrawal, unusual focus on certain areas of the house, and private conversations that seemed increasingly tense. Psychologists assisting with the investigation noted that Romy's observations were remarkably precise, reflecting her ability to notice patterns others might overlook, and underscoring the critical importance of eyewitness perspective in complex familial cases. Investigators then shifted attention to Nathan's digital communications. Encrypted messages, deleted texts, and obscure chat logs were meticulously reconstructed, revealing interactions with friends, colleagues, and distant family members. Some communications appeared casual on the surface, but, when analyzed within the broader context of family tension, suggested covert coordination, venting of grievances, and subtle strategizing. It became evident that Nathan was navigating multiple pressures simultaneously, managing interpersonal conflict, internalizing emotional strain, and, in some instances, attempting to control perceptions through communication. Forensic analysis continued to uncover details that underscored the premeditated nature of the events. Security footage, previously dismissed as unremarkable, showed Nathan moving in ways that suggested awareness of surveillance blind spots and strategic positioning within the estate. Certain objects were repositioned, lighting adjusted, and entry points monitored in ways that indicated deliberate planning. Each discovery strengthened the conclusion that the night of the tragedy was not a spontaneous outburst, but a sequence of calculated actions influenced by emotional, social, and material factors. Financial scrutiny revealed additional layers of complexity. Patterns of withdrawals, unexplained transfers, and disputed asset allocations suggested that long-standing disputes over the estate may have intensified personal grievances. Some transactions appeared to be attempts to assert control, while others seemed reactive, reflecting ongoing tension and unresolved conflict. Investigators were forced to consider how financial pressure intersected with psychological strain, potentially influencing decisions that culminated in tragedy. The social context surrounding Nathan also provided insights into his behavior. Friends and acquaintances described periods of isolation, erratic behavior, and moments of heightened agitation. Some had noticed him fixating on minor details or revisiting past disputes, indicating a preoccupation with unresolved conflicts. Others reported subtle signs of resentment or frustration directed at family members. These accounts, though anecdotal, offered crucial context, revealing the interplay of emotional, psychological, and social pressures that contributed to the tragedy. As the investigation progressed, hidden elements within the Holloway estate continued to emerge. Investigators discovered concealed compartments, subtle rearrangements of furniture, and items intentionally placed to obscure or mislead. These small but deliberate acts indicated a high level of familiarity with the environment and an awareness of how actions could influence perception. Forensic teams recognized that these manipulations were not incidental, but a key component of the planning that culminated in the night's events. Romy Holloway's perspective also revealed the emotional complexity of the situation. She described witnessing moments of tension that, while not outwardly violent, reflected the buildup of resentment, anger, and emotional strain. Psychologists noted that these interactions were indicative of patterns that could escalate under stress, particularly when combined with other pressures such as financial disputes or external influences. Understanding these dynamics was essential to comprehending not only Nathan's behavior, but the broader context in which the tragedy occurred. By the end of Chapter 6, the investigation had reached a critical juncture. Nathan Holloway remained central, but the evidence suggested that the events of that night were influenced by multiple converging factors: emotional strain, familial conflict, financial disputes, and deliberate planning. The tragedy could no longer be viewed as a simple act of anger. It was the culmination of long-standing tension, strategic behavior, and psychological complexity. And just when it seemed that the case was approaching clarity, a shocking new piece of evidence surfaced, one that threatened to redefine everything investigators thought they knew about the events at the Holloway estate. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The Holloway investigation had become a high-stakes puzzle with pieces scattered across time, space, and human emotion. By the seventh day, authorities were grappling with a case that no longer fit a simple narrative. Nathan Holloway remained the central figure, but every discovery revealed layers of complexity that deepened the mystery and challenged assumptions. It began with a breakthrough in digital forensics. Technicians reconstructed previously deleted emails and chat messages from Nathan's devices, uncovering interactions that hinted at both planning and conflict. Some messages were innocuous at first glance, brief exchanges with friends or colleagues, but when analyzed within the broader context of family tension, they suggested underlying resentments and possible intentions. Certain phrases repeated across communications, almost like a code, signaling preoccupation with perceived injustices, emotional grievances, and unresolved disputes. Investigators realized that Nathan's digital footprint was more than a timeline. It was a roadmap of his mindset in the weeks leading up to the tragedy. At the same time, the Holloway estate yielded additional forensic revelations. Investigators examined areas of the mansion and guest house previously overlooked, finding small but significant clues. Fingerprints on hidden surfaces, subtle smudges on polished furniture, and minor disturbances in dust patterns that suggested deliberate movements. Each of these minute details contributed to a growing narrative of premeditation. They indicated that whoever carried out the acts had a deep familiarity with the house and the daily routines of its occupants, reinforcing the theory that this was not a random act, but a calculated one. Romy Holloway's testimony became increasingly critical. Her observations of Nathan's behavior in the days leading up to the tragedy highlighted a pattern of isolation, agitation, and subtle manipulations. She recalled moments where Nathan appeared tense, focused on specific tasks, or engaged in interactions that seemed to escalate emotional pressure within the household. Psychologists assisting with the investigation emphasized that these patterns were indicative of growing psychological strain, a combination of pre-existing resentment and situational triggers that could explain, but not justify, the catastrophic outcome. Investigators also delved into Nathan's social network. Friends, acquaintances, and extended family members were interviewed, revealing details about his mental state, habits, and interpersonal relationships. Some described him as withdrawn, others noted moments of volatility, and several highlighted interactions that hinted at unresolved conflict. While no external party was implicated in the acts themselves, the information provided context for understanding how Nathan's emotional and psychological state may have contributed to the events. Financial disputes continued to emerge as a critical element of the investigation. A review of estate records revealed transfers, withdrawals, and asset allocations that had created tension between Nathan and his parents. Certain discrepancies appeared minor, but when considered alongside the psychological and social context, they suggested the possibility of underlying motives linked to control, entitlement, or perceived injustice. Investigators began constructing a timeline that connected financial grievances with behavioral patterns observed both digitally and in person. Hidden compartments and altered arrangements within the Holloway estate also played a significant role. Investigators noted that Nathan appeared to have moved objects, adjusted lighting, and manipulated spaces in ways that could obscure actions or mislead observers. These deliberate adjustments suggested forethought, indicating that the tragedy was the result of careful planning rather than spontaneous violence. Each small action contributed to a broader understanding of how the events unfolded, highlighting the interplay between intention and opportunity. As Chapter 7 progressed, investigators focused increasingly on Nathan's psychological profile. Experts assessed patterns of behavior, communication styles, and historical conflicts, constructing a nuanced portrait of a man caught between emotional instability and strategic calculation. The duality was striking. Impulsive emotional reactions existed alongside deliberate, methodical actions, making it difficult to separate instinct from planning. Understanding this balance was crucial to interpreting motive and predicting potential future behavior. Romy Holloway's emotional journey remained central to the narrative. Her grief, compounded by the ongoing scrutiny of investigators, media, and the public, revealed both resilience and vulnerability. She recounted details of her parents' final interactions, moments that were small yet telling, gestures, expressions, and exchanges that offered insight into the family's internal dynamics. These observations, combined with forensic and digital evidence, began to create a clearer timeline, highlighting both pre-existing tension and the critical moments that escalated toward tragedy. By the end of Chapter 7, the investigation had revealed that the Holloway tragedy was not a simple act of familial violence. Instead, it was a convergence of long-standing disputes, psychological stress, calculated planning, and situational triggers. Nathan Holloway's central role was undeniable, yet the surrounding context, family dynamics, financial pressures, and hidden tensions, was equally important to understanding the full picture. And just when the investigators believed they were approaching clarity, an unexpected discovery emerged from the guest house. A piece of evidence so startling it would force a complete reevaluation of the timeline, the sequence of events, and potentially Nathan's motivations. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. To be why the eighth day, the Holloway investigation had grown into a multifaceted puzzle, with each new discovery complicating what investigators had thought they understood. Nathan Holloway remained the central figure, yet the case was no longer about a single night of violence. It was about an accumulation of tensions, psychological pressures, and hidden motives that had been simmering for years. The breakthrough came with a forensic examination of Nathan's personal space in the guest house. Investigators discovered a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards, containing letters, notebooks, and digital storage devices. The content was shocking: detailed reflections on family disputes, strategic notes about interactions with his parents, and evidence suggesting careful observation of household routines. Some of the entries were diary-like, chronicling emotional struggles, while others were more calculated, almost like plans or contingency strategies. Each piece reinforced the idea that Nathan's actions were not purely impulsive, but influenced by a blend of long-standing resentment and deliberate preparation. Romy Holloway's recollections became even more critical at this stage. She described noticing subtle changes in Nathan's behavior leading up to the tragedy. Unusual vigilance, obsessive attention to household details, and private conversations that seemed increasingly tense. Psychologists assisting the case noted that these behaviors were consistent with mounting stress, but also with deliberate mental rehearsal of potential actions. Romy's observations allowed investigators to correlate specific diary entries and digital communications with real-world actions, bridging the gap between psychological insight and physical evidence. Digital forensics provided additional revelations. Analysis of deleted messages, encrypted communications, and activity logs revealed that Nathan had been in contact with multiple acquaintances during the critical weeks prior. Some messages were mundane, while others hinted at unresolved grievances and subtle manipulation. Investigators began to reconstruct a timeline showing how emotional tension, external influences, and strategic behavior converged in the days before the incident. Financial records added another layer of complexity. Transfers, disputed withdrawals, and inconsistencies in asset allocation suggested ongoing tension over inheritance and control of the estate. Investigators considered how these financial pressures may have exacerbated emotional strain, contributing to the decision-making process that ultimately led to the tragedy. The interplay between material incentives and psychological stress painted a nuanced picture. This was not merely a crime of passion, but a convergence of calculated actions and emotional triggers. Neighbors and acquaintances provided crucial contextual information. Witnesses described noticing Nathan in unusual locations around the estate, sometimes late at night or during periods when others expected him to be elsewhere. Observations of heightened agitation, private phone conversations, and interactions with family members suggested a pattern of behavior consistent with preparation and premeditation. Each account, though anecdotal, provided critical insight into Nathan's mindset and actions leading up to the night of the murders. Investigators also revisited the physical layout of the Holloway estate. Hidden compartments, subtle rearrangements, and deliberate placements of objects were analyzed to determine intent. Certain adjustments appeared designed to mislead or obscure the timeline of events, reinforcing the theory that the murders were carefully planned rather than spontaneous. Small but deliberate actions, locking doors, repositioning items, adjusting lighting, provided a glimpse into the strategic mindset behind the crime. Psychological evaluation of Nathan revealed a complex interplay of factors. Experts noted signs of emotional volatility, preoccupation with perceived injustices, and behavioral patterns consistent with both impulsive and calculated decision-making. This duality made it challenging to separate instinct from premeditation. Investigators recognized that understanding Nathan's psychological state was critical for interpreting motive, assessing risk, and reconstructing the sequence of events accurately. Romy's ongoing testimony highlighted the emotional and relational context. She recounted family interactions, tensions, and moments of conflict that, while minor on the surface, contributed to a buildup of pressure within the household. Psychologists emphasized that these interactions, combined with existing psychological stressors, created an environment in which tragedy could unfold. Romy's insights were invaluable for bridging the gap between behavioral evidence and emotional context. By the end of Chapter 8, investigators had constructed a preliminary timeline, identifying key moments and interactions that led up to the tragedy. Nathan Holloway's behavior was understood as a combination of long-standing resentment, strategic planning, and psychological strain, influenced by both internal conflicts and external pressures. The Holloway estate, once a symbol of familial stability, had become a stage upon which years of tension and hidden grievances played out with catastrophic consequences. And just when the case seemed to be coalescing into a coherent narrative, an unexpected discovery in the mansion's basement forced investigators to reevaluate the entire sequence of events, revealing a twist that would challenge everything they thought they knew about that fateful night. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. By the ninth day, the Holloway investigation had reached a level of intensity and scrutiny unlike anything investigators had faced before. What had initially seemed like a straightforward case of familial violence had evolved into a sprawling, complex narrative of psychological strain, long-standing resentment, financial disputes, and strategic planning. Each new discovery added layers to the story, revealing that the tragedy at the Holloway estate was not a simple act of anger, but a culmination of years of tension and carefully concealed secrets. The breakthrough came from a detailed review of Nathan Holloway's activities in the days immediately preceding the tragedy. Digital forensics uncovered previously deleted messages, emails, and online interactions, revealing patterns that were subtle but significant. Some communications appeared ordinary at first glance, but when analyzed within the context of the family's history and recent tensions, they indicated preoccupation with past grievances, ongoing frustrations, and possible plans to assert control over household dynamics. Investigators began to see a convergence of psychological pressure and intentional action, a combination that suggested Nathan's mindset was both volatile and methodical. Physical evidence in the mansion continued to yield critical insights. Forensic teams analyzed minute details, fingerprints on hidden surfaces, slight disturbances in dust patterns, and repositioned objects that suggested deliberate manipulation of the environment. Each discovery strengthened the conclusion that the events of that night were carefully orchestrated. The sequence of actions, from navigating blind spots and security cameras to adjusting doors and lighting, indicated that the perpetrator or perpetrators possessed intimate knowledge of the estate and its routines. Romy Holloway's testimony remained indispensable. She described observing subtle shifts in Nathan's behavior, including withdrawal, heightened focus on specific household areas, and private conversations that hinted at internal conflict. Psychologists assisting the investigation emphasized that these behaviors reflected both emotional strain and cognitive processing consistent with premeditation. Romy's observations provided crucial context, allowing investigators to correlate physical evidence, digital communications, and psychological indicators into a coherent framework. Financial pressures continued to emerge as a central theme. Estate records revealed complex asset transfers, unexplained withdrawals, and disputed allocations, suggesting that unresolved financial grievances had contributed to the emotional and psychological climate within the household. Investigators considered whether these disputes were a catalyst for Nathan's behavior or a contributing factor that interacted with pre-existing emotional and psychological vulnerabilities. The interplay between financial stress and emotional instability became a key component of understanding motive. Investigators also focused on Nathan's social interactions outside the household. Interviews with friends, acquaintances, and extended family members provided additional insights into his mental state, behavioral patterns, and relational dynamics. Several individuals noted increased isolation, obsessive focus on minor disputes, and heightened emotional responses. These observations, while anecdotal, reinforced the conclusion that Nathan was navigating multiple pressures simultaneously, both internal and external, and that his behavior was shaped by a combination of emotional strain and strategic calculation. Hidden compartments and altered arrangements within the Holloway estate added further complexity. Investigators noted deliberate adjustments to objects, furniture, and lighting, all suggesting intent to manipulate perception and obscure the true sequence of events.